Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Innalhamdulillahi nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan 'abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa inna asdaqal hadithi kitabullah وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sending immense greetings and salutations upon the final Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, continuing our journey with the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the most important topic inside the Quran being none other than the belief and the concept of Tawheed. And thus, before we continue to the second phase of the second topic, we find that certain individuals began to present certain questions or wording. Why isn't the word of Tawheed mentioned inside the Quran? Why is not specifically that word, if it's so important, not mentioned inside the Quran? Well, you find it mentioned that the root verb or the essence of Tawheed comes from being singling out, making something single, making something one, becoming ahad. That we find the Quran is always talking about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we find Tawheed becomes a concept or the belief of delivering, of associating nothing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with all authenticity is the meaning or ma'ani of Tawheed. And likewise, we find inside the Quran, the Sunnah, especially inside the Quran, that sometimes certain things are not mentioned. That does not mean that you do not believe in them. For example, the word al-Dajjal is not mentioned inside the Quran. There is no clear wording of al-Dajjal inside the Quran, even though there are certain ayat inside the Quran which talk about the signs of the Day of Judgment, or talk about certain elements of the final day that will begin to take place. So if a person follows this methodology, that if a word is not mentioned inside the Quran, it means it does not exist, it's not important, this is not accurate. The Quran will use generic words and terminologies which will encompass many of the concepts of belief that we find. Likewise, we find certain individuals begin to mention, for example, it comes to mind, that adab al-qabr, punishment of the grave, doesn't exist inside the Quran. There's no direct mentioning. There is mentioning inside the Quran, directly and indirectly, about the concept of the punishment of the grave. The person needs to begin to look slightly deeper and begin to understand those ayat and the tafsir of those ayat. So when a person begins to search for something accurately inside the Quran, a person will find it. A person should not worry too much about istalahat, about terminology. As Ulama mentioned, that sometimes the name al-Tawheed became dominant, as we find Kitab al-Tawheed of Sheikh Muhammad Al-Wahhab, of Ibn Khuzaymah and other ulama. Sometimes you find Kitab al-Iman of Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah. Sometimes you find al-Aqidah, likewise works of Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah. Likewise you find Usul of Ahl Sunnah or Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah. All of these are synonymous terminologies. At one time or one stage, these various names began to take place. So we're not worried about the names. What ulama mentioned is the usul, is the principles. The principles that you find inside Kitab al-Tawheed or in Book of Aqidah al-Wasatiyah or in a book of Aqa'id that we find, all the principles are unanimous. They're all accurate, they're all exactly the same. So one shouldn't get so bogged down with the title of something which exists, because that could change from one time to another time. So we find also the principles of Tawheed have been extracted, as Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen mentioned, rahmatullah alayh, that if you look at the concept of Tawheed, generally falls into three broad categories. Either the rububiyyah, the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either the worship towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or towards al-asma wa sifat, the names and attributes that belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Has this been specifically mentioned inside the Quran? Has it been mentioned inside the Sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ said that this is Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, this is Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, this is Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat? Does it exist? No, it doesn't. So how does a person begin to make this codification? Shaykh al-Taymin mentions بالتتبع واستقراء, continuous reading of the Quran, you find that in general, ayat talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking about belief, will come into one of these three broad categories. That's it. So there is no concrete rule or justification that in the Sunnah has to mention Tawheed is these three divisions. There is no rule. But we know that when continuous, بالتتبع واستقراء, continuous reading and deciphering and placing into section, you find these three become the three main broad categories of Tawheed, which are in general unanimously accepted by ulama Ahl Sunnah. There may be some small variances, but you find these variances are essence within these elements. As for example, some people begin to talk about the ruling and judgment by the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people may try to make it a separate section, and some people say that's a deviation, that's an innovation. But the asl, the foundation is what? Is not ruling by the law and justification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of Tawheed. In al-hukmu illa lillah. Yes, it is. If we conclude upon that, then we can begin to bridge the gap and help us to understand. So we shouldn't get so worried about any certain titles we mentioned that people may begin to slip up upon them. It's the principles which count that we should begin to focus upon. So we highlighted ahmiyat al-Tawheed, the importance of Tawheed. Is the first subject, the first matter that concerns every single Muslim and believer. And that's the foundation needs to be sound and pure. If your foundation is corrupt, as we mentioned previously, then the actions are corrupt. Bima'ana, even the person is trying to do well inside their actions, but their aqidah is full of weakness. That's why even the word, going back slightly, the word aqidah, this actually comes inside the Quran, not the actual word aqidah, but the root verb, aqada. وَمِنْ شَرِّ النَّفَّاثَاتِ فِي الْعُقَدِ, from the witches, or the people, the sorcerers who blow into the knots. So aqad, they find likewise, you find a woman who wears the necklace that each ring is attached to one ring, is difficult to break. So your aqidah becomes something which is strong, which is linked together. So those who blow into the knot, so your aqidah becomes rasikh, becomes strong. The more a person studies aqa'id, studies iman, it makes their iman, their faith become rasikh, becomes firm, becomes strongly within their heart. It's not easy to break the aqidah, the aqa'id of that individual. So we find that if that foundation is something which is wholesome, as the Quran describes, a pure land brings out what? Pure fruits, goodness. A corrupt land only brings out bad fruits, or brings out weeds and corruption, etc. So the person, that's what we're trying to highlight, the foundation of the believer, every single Muslim, has to be sound. Because eventually you find that good fruits will begin to be delivered. As the Quran describes inside Surah Ibrahim, that we find that the belief of the individual, أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ تُؤْتِي أُكُلُهَا كُلَّ حِينٍ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهَا. You find أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ, a person with a strong belief, that قَوْلُ ثَابِتٌ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, its roots are firmly going deep into the ground, going into the veins and the body of the human being. And then it begins to deliver what? Fruits, branches out all the way into the heavens. تُؤْتِي أُكُلُهَا كُلُّ حِينٍ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهَا. And every so often it begins to deliver fruits, every so often in the season, or etc., to benefit the people. So Tawheed, it benefits the individual, it benefits the land, it benefits the people, and it benefits the individual even more so inside the Akhirah. So then, moving away from the importance of Tawheed, as we mentioned, looking at that which nullifies one's Tawheed, or one that can corrupt one's belief. What is the opposite of Iman? As we mentioned, that Iman is belief that a person needs to develop inside their life, and likewise you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always mentioned the opposites, and that's what ulama mentioned, via opposites the truth becomes apparent. If there was no Iman and kufr, you won't really appreciate Iman. If there wasn't khair and shar, if there wasn't good and evil, etc. We find via these opposites, or what's known as zawjiyah, things become apparent, even in the animal world, in the human world. We find the Quran mentions, وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Everything we made a concept of pairs, the sun, the moon, the heaven, the earth, the male, the female, the land, the ocean, etc. All these pairs that you find, what we see which are visible, and likewise the pairs which are not visible, good and bad, and that which is pure, that which is impure, iman, belief, disbelief, etc. These are all the opposites. Via the opposites, the truth becomes apparent. So if there was no kufr, then we would not really appreciate what is iman, because then there would be no test, there would be no concept of remaining upon this earth. If there was no evil, there was no test, there was no trials, we wouldn't really be able to appreciate of coming out of becoming real believers. And that's the Quran has this concept of highlighting Alif Lam Mim, أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فلا يعلمن الله الذين صدقوا ولا يعلمن الكاذبين. In the beginning of Surah Al-Ankabut, the 29th chapter of the Quran, we find that do people believe, or do people perceive, mankind think, that they say that we believe, and they be left alone. وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. There will not be trial, there will not be tested, there will not be persecution, there will not be hardship. For what reason? That we may begin to deliver and establish those who are the truthful individuals and those who are the liars. So Iman isn't, as some of us that we think, is something which is constant. There's going to come a time whereby once Iman is tested. In the beginning of the search for Iman, everything may become easy for the individual, but after a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or whatever it may be, وَالْعِلْمُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى, person begins to get tested to really see, do they really believe? Because so some of us, we begin to think that Iman is something constant. And this is a slight deviation when people begin to think Iman is something constant. We touched upon last week. Iman is not something constant. Iman is something which fluctuates, which changes according to the time and according to the devotion of the individual. And that's what we mentioned in nutshell, Aqidah Ahl-Sunnah, yani al-Iman yazidu bil-ta'ati wa yanqus bil-ma'siyati. Iman goes up via obedience and it goes down via disobedience. That is what Iman in a nutshell is for Ahl-Sunnah. Yes, a lot of technical studies that begin to take place. Is action part of Iman? Is it inside the heart? But it's a safe conclusion that we conclude. Remember, we are trying to find a path of action. It's not just a path of rhetoric or academia. You're trying to find a path of action and devotion towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, you find what comes to mind, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya mentioned some strange words. He mentioned رُبَّ طَاعَةٍ يَجُرُكَ إِلَى مَعْصِيَةٍ وَرُبَّ مَعْصِيَةٍ يَجُرُكَ إِلَى الطَّاعَةِ. That perhaps disobedience takes you to obedience, and perhaps obedience takes you to disobedience. They're very strange words. We all know how disobedience can take the individual to obedience. So the person may sin and may think, how did I make that sin? How did I make that mistake? That's how you find in his works talking about the Madarij al-Salikin, the footsteps of the travellers who are travelling up to the heavens, etc. He talks about this concept of spirituality, of how individuals who sin and they err, they make mistakes and become better individuals. That's quite crystal clear. But how about the opposite? How can ta'ah, how can obedience take you towards disobedience? How does that come? How is that possible that your obedience takes you towards disobedience? I know this is slightly game off the track, but this will help us to understand. The reason for that is what? If a person becomes arrogant in their worship, looks down upon other individuals, think they're better than another individual, so that ta'ah in essence is becoming hujjah against them, is becoming evidence against them. It's destroying their worship, because now they're looking down upon the other brothers and sisters and the people that are around them. But where your ta'ah, your obedience, as we find that which has been attributed to Ibn Taymiyyah, that the more I increase, كُلُّ مَا زِدْتُ عِلْمًا زِدْتُ جَهْلًا, the more I increase in my knowledge, the more I increase in my ignorance. What type of ignorance is referring to? Is Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah ignorant individual? No. It means ignorance in my recognition. In my recognition, be ma'na that I am qasir, I'm deficient, that I have all this knowledge, but my action is deficient in comparison to the knowledge that I carry. And that's like many of us today, that we may carry many things, but our actual implementation is very minimal. So we find that learning what is the opposite of Iman strengthens the individual, because as we mentioned, by opposites the truth becomes apparent. By opposites the truth becomes established. Likewise, وَلَقَدْ صَدَقَ الشَّاعِرُ, the poet, he spoke correctly when he mentioned عَرَفْتُ الشَّرَّ لِكَيْ تَلَافِيهِ. I learned evil, or that which is incorrect, to be able to stay away from it. وَمَنْ لَا يَعْرِفْ الشَّرَّ مِنَ الْخَيْرِ جَدِيرٌ أَنْ يَقَعَ فِيهِ. Paraphrasing these words of poetry, my line, the memory says at this stage, whoever doesn't know the difference between good and evil will eventually do what? Will fall into that evil. So that's why a reason for a person studies the opposite is to strengthen oneself, to be able to avoid that which is inaccurate. That's the reason behind it. If you don't know the difference between that which is authentic, that which is not authentic, you will eventually fall into that which is questionable. And that's what we find as basic students, that's why there's certain books and there's certain texts a person may be warned against them, don't read this. Why? What is the reason behind that? That is because sometimes the general awam, the general masses at times are not able to make a distinction between a person's works and their writings. And inside their writings they may have instigated certain aqa'id which are corrupt, which a normal individual is not able to decipher. For example, we find Imam Razi, famous Mufassir that we find, Mafatihul Ghaib, in his famous book of Tafsir that we find, it's very common that you find, but inside there we find that he tries to instill the views of the Asha'ira wal Maturidiyya inside his writings. So a normal individual is not able to decipher that. A normal person who has basic reading of the Arabic language tafsir may fall into traps of the way that he begins to make tafsir of certain ayat. Likewise, Imam Zamakhshari, they find Sahib al-Kashaf. And this individual, in terms of the Arabic language, he is fasih. And to this day, no one has written tafsir in the Arabic language the way he's written it. And he was so accurate inside his understanding of the Arabic language that even ulama who don't even like him, they'll still look at certain elements of the way that he deciphered certain words and certain linguistics inside the Quran. But this individual, in terms of his tafsir, he was a staunch Murtaza inside his aqa'id, and he impressed that inside his writings. He never even hid it. He wrote about it clearly inside his works of tafsir. So even though Kashaf, Imam Zamakhshari, is a well-versed individual inside the Arabic language, but if an average individual begins to read these works, this concept of deviancy could begin to enter into the mind and into the heart of the individual, and thus we find that sometimes excessive reading of philosophy and mantiq and logic. Look how many people have their minds have become slightly upset. So that's why the person should be wary of reading into other religions, other ways of life, reading any books of deviation, especially the person who doesn't have the ability to decipher, doesn't have the skills, doesn't have the tools. Because you find many people at times even read certain things of what the Shia have written, then they come and start asking questions that, how is this possible, how is that possible? So a person tries to stay away from any form of deviancy to try to preserve their iman and learn that which is kufr, which is inaccurate, to help themselves. So you find al-kufr, that you find what is the meaning of kufr that we find, which occurs inside the Quran and Sunnah that we find. And thus you find that the Arabic language generally you find is linked with the Quran as well. That there's a linguistic meaning of a word, and there is also a technical meaning of the word. For example, as-salah, that we offer the prayer, the linguistic, linguistically, as-salah bima'na ad-du'a. As-salah that we offer, the linguistic meaning is ad-du'a. So that's why that some deviant individuals, they say that my salah is I just make du'a. So they don't pray 5 times a day, they say that linguistically, as-salah, because it means du'a, so I just make my du'a, that's my prayer done. No. That's the linguistic meaning. Amma shar'an, technically, we know that as-salah is with the intention to pray towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, beginning with the takbir and finishing with the taslim and with all the arkan inside the prayer and the movement inside the prayer. That is the technical meaning. But in essence, the whole of your salah is what? When you are praying, you are making what? You're making du'a. That's you find the hadith Qudsi, قَسَمْتُ الصَّلَاةَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ عَبْدِي وَلِعَبْدِي مَا سَأَلْ. I've divided the prayer in two halves. And my servant will have whatever he or she asks for. Here you find as-salah huna bima'na ish. Al-Fatiha. Surah Al-Fatiha has been divided in 2 sections. So the whole of your salah, inside ruku, inside sujood, inside tashahud, is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So likewise you find al-kufr. The linguistic meaning of al-kufr is at-taghattiya. Taghatti shay, to cover something, is to conceal something. That is the linguistic meaning of al-kufr, to hide, to conceal something. So thus you find, for example, inside the Quran, كَمَثَلِ الْغَيْثِ أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارِ, like the rain which comes down and it startles the kuffar. Now here I spent a long time thinking, this is something shay'un ajib. Obviously my lack of knowledge and understanding Arabic language, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned inside these ayat, inside towards the end of Surah Al-Hadid, the 57th chapter of the Quran, اِعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا, know for a fact that this dunya is la'ib wa lahu, play and amusement, and boasting about your children and your wealth. كَمَثَلِ غَيْثِ, like the rain which comes down, أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارِ, which startles the disbelievers. How are disbelievers looking at the rain begin to have iman? It doesn't make sense, because they're not people of iman. So here this began to worry me for a long time, that something, obviously nothing is wrong with the ayah, something is wrong with me. So what's the meaning of kuffar? Here kuffar huna bima'na lughatan al-fallahun, the farmers. Because the farmers are the ones that wait for the rain and they marvel at the rain. That's why we find the most closest people towards iman are those people Ahlul Badiyah, who live outside the outskirts, who live in the farm, who live outside, and they begin to visualize the rain coming down, and it begins to come down, the plantation begins to grow. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them al-kuffar. Call them kuffar, bima'na fallahun, farmers. It's not calling them disbelievers. That's the linguistic meaning. The technical meaning, why have they been called disbelievers? Because why they reject, they conceal the truth. Like a farmer who takes the seed, plants it in the ground, and there's what covers it up. So kuffar, disbelievers, are those individuals deep down inside their hearts, they know the truth, but they cover it up, they seal it with ma'asi, with disobedience, with putting it in the back of their mind by sins, whatever it may be, paying no attention towards it. So see the technical meaning and the linguistic meaning. That they are one who conceals the truth, one who rejects, belies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those are the disbelievers. That is an element of kufr that we find. So in the Sharia, it is the opposite of iman that we find. And a lot of the Jews and the Christians, they know the truth, but they refuse. So there's some people who know the truth and they refuse to believe in Islam. So we find that the aspects the base of kufr is lying. It's basically lying and rejection is the base of kufr, that the person knows the truth within themselves, but they try to hide and conceal it and try to stay away from the truth. So you find that al-kufr anwa'uhu, different types of kufr that you find which exist. You find al-qism al-awwal, the first type of kufr that we find, we're talking about here, that which will take the person outside the fold of Islam. If a person has these elements of kufr inside their life and within themselves, this will expel the individual or take that individual outside the fold of Islam. Firstly, we find kufr takdhib, a kufr which is belying or rejecting the truth. The person knows the truth and rejects it. For example, the Quran mentions, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا أو كذب بالحق لما جاءه أليس في جهنم مثوى للكافرين. Who does more atrocity inside Surah Al-Ankabut 29th chapter verse number 68 that we find? Who does the most oppression? Whoever attributes a lie towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أو كذب بالحق لما جاءه, or a person who rejects the truth when it comes to that individual, أليس في جهنم مثوى للكافرين. Is not Jahannam the final abode and place of residence for the disbelieving individuals? The second type of kufr that we find is kufr al-iba wal-istikbar ma'a tasdiq. A person has kufr of rejection and arrogance, full of pride, whilst knowing that this is something which is true for the person is to follow inside their life. That is quite clearly the way, this refusal or arrogance or pride that we find is the way of Iblis. When he said to him, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. So a person has this type of kufr of knowing the truth and then he's full of arrogance and pride. So Iblis, la'natullahi alayhi, أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ. He rejected the truth. He could see this was the truth. He needed to bow down. He needed to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He rejected it, but on top of that, وَاسْتَكْبَرَ. He became arrogant. He became proud. So we can see that at times people who disbelieve also become proud and arrogant, and thus they expose themselves to more elements of punishment. The third type of kufr that we find is kufr of shak or kufr of dhann. A person has kufr of some form of doubt or inside their heart about the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتَهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. You find that Surah Al-Kahf, you find that when he entered into the garden, this person, he oppressed his own self. قَالَ مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا. He said, I don't think that this garden will ever perish. Let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not take this garden away from me. وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمًا وَلَئِنْ رُدِدتُّ إِلَى رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. And I don't think the hour will ever be established. And even if the hour is established, I will return back and be given more reward inside the akhirah. قال له صاحبه وهو يحاوره. His companion, who is speaking with him, having a dialogue with him, أكفرت بالذي خلقك. Are you rejecting, committing kufr, the one who created you min turab, from the earth, ثم من نطفة, then from the semen, ثم سواك رجلا, then he made you a human being, a man. لكنه والله ربي ولا أشرك بربي أحدا. So basically this person is rejecting the truth having shak, having doubt, doesn't think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created that individual, won't return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that type of kufr takes that individual outside the fold of Islam. The fourth type of kufr that we find, and the dalil, the evidence from the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا عَمَّا أُنذِرُوا مُعْرِضُونَ. Those who disbelieve regarding that which we have warned them about, these individuals are disbelieving individuals. Why? Because they are turning away. So a person knows the truth, is presented to them, they turn away from the truth. This is a form of kufr that takes the individual outside the fold of Islam. The fifth type of kufr that we find is kufr nifaq. Obviously the greater in hypocrisy. As the Quran mentioned, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ آمَنُوا ثُمَّ كَفَرُوا فَطُبِعَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ فَهُمْ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. These people, they believe, then they commit disbelief. فَطُبِعَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ. Then their hearts are sealed upon that kufr, upon that disbelief. فَهُمْ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. And these individuals will never be able to understand. So these are the five basic elements of kufr, that if a person has these elements, these major elements of kufr, the person will be expelled outside in the fold of Islam. The second type of kufr that we find, لا يخرج عن الملة. The person does not go outside the fold of Islam, and it is basically هو الذنوب, a kufr al-amali, the kufr disbelief of one's actions. Here all these types of kufr are all to do, qalbi, to do with the heart, that a person rejects it and then expresses it. As for kufr al-amali, a certain action the person does which can be an element of kufr. As we mentioned last week, the Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentioned, just because a person does an action of kufr, it does not mean that the person is a kafir. Okay, that's a golden rule. That's why you find that some individuals in their haste, in their zeal, in their passion, somebody does haram, does kufr, they say he's a kafir. No. Person commits kufr, the person is fasiq, is rebellious, is mujrim, is zalim, is oppressor, is a bad individual, is a disobedient individual. We cannot take that label and say now this person has become a disbeliever. A person is very vigilant about that, and obviously some people try to throw the blame upon other people, that you like to make any takfir upon people. And now obviously that now it is all crystal clear. And we request brothers, at any moment inside our life have we ever declared any individual to be a disbeliever? Abadan, never. Except for those individuals who many of the ulama declared them to be disbelievers, who existed previously, whether it be people like Ibn Arabi, Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah goes to review that he's aqa'id and he's believed. Likewise, maybe some contemporary individuals existed around that time that many ulama concluded these individuals, they are aqa'id and they believe, is outside the realms of Ahlul Sunnah. Other than that, never in my life have I personally made a statement, so-and-so is a disbeliever. So that should be crystal clear, because some people want to instigate that he makes takfir upon people. But never in my life have I said that so-and-so is a disbeliever, and I don't have the tools and ability to say so-and-so is a disbeliever. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge the individual. Likewise, another blame people want to say is to shajju' an-nas ila takfir. You try to encourage people to make takfir upon people. Never in my life do I make to encourage people to make takfir upon anybody. It's not for us to say so-and-so. If there's an element of corruption which becomes visible, a person may once in a while highlight this is something which is corrupt, this is something which is inaccurate. That does not mean that the person follows those aqa'id and those views. That's why ulama of aqa'id have mentioned, you will not find today someone who is khullas al-khawarij. You will not find someone today, someone who is pure khawarij, or pure mu'tazili, or amongst the asha'ira. Very rarely do you find that. That you find that many of these deviant sects, you find that their views begin to slip over. They begin to share certain basic elements amongst themselves. So if a person may, for example, may say a certain statement, we should be very careful to say, أَنَّ هَذَا شَخْصٌ مِنَ الْخَوَارِجِ. If a person makes a mistake inside their aqa'id or inside their writing or inside their statement, it's not for us now to say that this individual min al-khawarij. Okay, that should be crystal clear, because some people, they try to do that. Say a person said this, so now this proves this person must be a khawarij. No, that's it. The person should stop there. Because we find that any individual can have a misunderstanding, can have a mistake or whatever it may be. So we should be very careful in getting around and applying rules and principles, being the layman, applying the rules and principles upon the layman around us. Okay, the rules and principles, we're safely concluding, are to be applied by a higher body, okay, upon the other people. They're not to be applied by just us. Just because we read a few texts and a few words and then we try to say, right, this applies to so-and-so. It's not for us to do that. And nor should anybody try to do that. So we find the person, the kufr that we find, which is not taken out of the middle of Islam, is a smaller kufr that we find, which we mentioned, inside the Quran, for example, that we find, in the hadith that we find, is qital al-Muslim. The killing of a Muslim is kufr. It does not take the individual outside the fold of Islam, even though the wordings are very harsh. Sibab al-Muslim fusuq, wa qitaluhu kufr. To abuse a Muslim is fusuq, is rebelliousness. To fight him is kufr. Now here, once again, remember we said, go back to istilahat, understanding ulama hadith, ulama usul. How do they understand fighting him is kufr? So once again, the person may try to say, look, if a person fights another Muslim, فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ. No. The kufr here does not take you out the fold of Islam. Even though you're fighting one another. The Quran, inside, for example, Surah Al-Hujurat mentions that وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. The Quran mentions that two groups of the believers fight one another. The Quran doesn't say that one group are believers and the other group are disbelievers. The Quran says if two groups from amongst the believers fight one another. The Quran describes both groups as well as believers. Try to rectify, reconcile within them, amongst themselves. So we find that if a person he fights another Muslim, does not mean that individual. This is a minor kufr, obviously something bad and something which is evil. It does not take the individual outside the fold of Islam. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا قَرْيَةً كَانَتْ آمِنًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out this parable inside Surah Al-Nahl, if I'm not mistaken, of people in a village who are mutma'inna, in a state of peace and tranquility. يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا رَغَدًا. Its rizq will come in abundance upon these people, مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ, from every single location. فَكَفَرَتْ بِعَنْعُمِ اللَّهِ. They became ungrateful of the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So linguistically, all of us at some moment in life become what? Become kuffar. Linguistically, anybody who's ungrateful towards the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or shows any form of ingratitude is classified linguistically as what? As a kafir. Ungrateful. That's another meaning of kafara, jahada, to reject, to be ungrateful. So at some moment in life, all of us have become ungrateful towards the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So any form of ingratitude enters you into an element of minor kufr. لا ترجعوا بعد كفارا. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, don't return after me kuffara. If we took it literally, don't become disbelievers. You begin to smite, kill one another, strike at the necks of one another. So here, once again, Muslims fight one another. Are they classified as disbelievers? No. Here the ma'na is that this is a form of kufr, of minor, disbelief, of fighting one another. مَنْ حَلَفَ بِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ كَفَرَ وَأَشْرَكَ. Whoever takes an oath by other than the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. That individual has committed disbelief, or ashraka, or is associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, فَقَدْ كَفَرَ, what does that mean? Does it mean now the person is a disbeliever? Has left the fold of Islam? No, it is the minor kufr the person has fallen into, taking an oath by other than the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, you find that a person, مَنْ تَرَكَ الصَّلَاةِ فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. Whoever leaves the salah has committed disbelief. Oh, here is a bit more of a technical discussion that ulama begin to take, because here they literally take the meaning. مَنْ تَرَكَ الصَّلَاةِ. Whoever leaves the prayer, فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. They go to the view that this person, if they continuously leave the prayer, this person becomes kharij an al-millah. This person becomes outside the fold of Islam. So a person who continuously leaves the prayer, is classified, not for us to apply that, becomes a disbeliever. And some even go to the view, minute view, go to the view that even if it's one salah person leaves it, faqad kafara, the person has left the fold of Islam, even though that is the minute view that we find. But it's still trying to highlight the harshness of as-salah, the importance, the ahmiyah of salah that we find, that this is something, the bridging gap between iman and kufr. The symbol between iman and kufr is not always one's clothing, one's etiquette, one's speech. These are all good things. But the real symbol is what? Is as-salah. فَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. Whoever leaves the prayer has then left the fold of Islam if they remain persistent upon that. Likewise, فَيَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِصَاصُ فِي الْقَتْلَى. Or you believe indeed in the law of equality or equity in punishment has been laid down, and if a person harms or kills another individual, as we mentioned, and this is a minor kufr of killing or harming another individual. Because really at the end of the day, for another Muslim, we don't know what exists inside their heart. As you find in the famous hadith of Usama bin Zayd, where he went and he killed an individual, and he said that basically he feared my sword. He feared that he knew that I was going to kill him, so he said the shahada. So the Prophet ﷺ, he rebuked him and said that, did you open up his chest and see what was inside there for you to make that judgment? So what we're trying to highlight, sometimes externally a person may do an action of kufr, may commit disobedience, may do something, and obviously yes, the external is actually what exists inside the heart. But there could be sometimes we don't know. We don't know what the reason or what could be there, so we should be very vigilant and to try to seeing someone else's coughing or to highlight something about another individual. So you find if you read the works of the ulama, even people who may have deviated something in their writing or their works and their statements, what you find in general what they write about them, they say that this person, ila rahmatillah, has left, gone to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we only highlight that critique which is acceptable. Never go beyond the bounds of making excessive statements about an individual. That person may have sacrificed their life, made the effort, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may wipe out their sins, wipe out their mistakes, may forgive that individual. We don't know. We're not at the moment towards the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a person wants to highlight the mistakes of an individual, the person should be quite accurate, should be daqiq, should be critical in what they want to highlight and not go beyond the bounds to make personal statements about another individual, especially another Muslim. So if I find al-kufr al-akbar yukhraj min al-millah, a person who carries out major kufr, that person will come out the fold of Islam and all of their actions will come null and void. As a person who commits a minor element of kufr, that person is not taken out the fold of Islam, and only that specific action may become taken away from that individual, and that person could be open or exposed themselves to the punishment or threat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who commits major kufr will remain for eternity inside the hellfire. While kufr al-asghar, the minor kufr, that person could enter into the hellfire, will not remain there for eternity, will eventually come out of the hellfire. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, can forgive that individual and not enter the person in the fire at all. Okay, we should remember this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يَغْفِرُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive whomever He wants and He can punish whomever He wants. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why did you forgive so and so, why do you pardon so and so, why do you punish so and so. So obviously a person should be vigilant about that inside their life and inside their creed. Obviously we hope and we all aspire that we're forgiven and we're pardoned. At the same time we fear, as we mentioned last week, a person will be exposed to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, we find major kufr, what could happen to that individual? Their blood, their property, their honor, their soul, their body, all can be taken rightfully by the right of Islam. So a person who commits major kufr, their wealth can be taken away from him, the hudud, the punishment can be applied upon them. As for a person who commits minor kufr, then their blood, their sanctity and their property is still safe. You cannot take anything away from that any individual. Likewise, you find that the person who's a Muslim could have elements of kufr, so your love and your hatred is basically on a scale of fairness, as many ulama mentioned. So you hate that person according to the amount of kufr that they commit, and you love that person according to the iman that they display. So that's why you find that family members, we have a natural love towards them. We have that love which is because of relationship, blood relationship. But people of iman become what? إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. People of iman become more closer. Because why? Because they share the element of iman. So you hate and you love a Muslim proportionally. Because some people tend to go over the bounds. If they say kufr, they totally hate the individual. They see some iman, they totally love the person. The person's love and hatred should be balanced for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we all have that, don't we? Have that in our family members, somebody who doesn't pray or doesn't do a certain action. So we have to begin to be fair in our love and our hatred. So in the moments whereby they're doing something of kufr, we stay away from them, etc. But at the same time, when the moment is right, we need to advise them. Because sometimes many young brothers or people in zeal of Islam, they break away. As we mentioned last week, uququl walidain, severing the ties of family is a severe, major sin. Because maybe you could be the only individual who's inside that house that can remind your family members about salah, about iman, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you go away, there might be no one that's there. So you have to think, you have to weigh it up and think, use hikmah, wisdom. That if I walk away from my parents or I stay away from my parents a long lapses of time and there's no one there who's going to come and remind them and to take care of them, etc. So then now you are liable. There's been
I know it sounds trivial, obviously it's not something trivial. There's brothers who don't go and visit their parents because my parents have a television. Well, we know the television is something which is haram, the television box is haram, what's placed inside there or what's shown is haram. So we know it's something bad, it's not something good. But maybe the elderly parents and they sit there and they pass their time watching television. Now we don't visit them at all because my mum and dad have a television in the house. I don't even want to go there. You know, begin to think deeply that if you stay away, or you know that your brothers and sisters they don't pray or whatever it may be, you don't hardly ever visit them, or you don't send them a gift, you don't take interest in trying to go and see them at the right appropriate time, you drift away, what begins to happen? What has happened practically in many of our lives? Let's be truthful. Most of our family members have done what? Drifted away from us, haven't they? Because we haven't taken those practical steps to exert our efforts. And if we quickly say, no, they're carrying out this major kufr, it's this, that, and the other. No, you have to exert your effort. Tasbir. Be patient. And if you begin to change the family members inside your home, and you begin to change the major kufr, the major impurity away from your home, and inshallah you find the fruits will begin to grow at a later stage whereby more and more people are returning back to the concept of al-Tawheed. Then we find another concept we just touched upon is the concept of nifaq, of hypocrisy that we find, which also exists in another important terminology that we find. And we find that nifaq is taken from a masdar, verbal noun from nafiq, from what's known as a tunnel. A tunnel which exists that you find. For example, you find that a lizard or an animal that lives inside the tunnels, you find, in general you find that these animals, when they make a tunnel, they always make an exiting path. Okay, that's what the word nafq comes from, the tunnel. They have making tunnels inside the ground. So if you began to chase a lizard or chase this animal or whatever, maybe lizard, you go down the hole, you try to catch it. As you place your hand inside there, you find that it would have made an exit. So you can't actually bend your hand unless you're a plastic man or something. So you come out. So it's escaped you, it's tricked you, it's deceived you. So that is the linguistic meaning of having this exiting format. Look at that in relation to the technical meaning. The person displays what? Displays iman, but inside their heart is what? Is hypocrisy. A hatred to do what? To destroy Islam. That's the major element of nifaq. So we're going to touch upon the minor elements of nifaq that we find, but the major element is the person is a Muslim, zahiran. That's when you look at the munafiqun at the time of the Prophet, they were mi'a fi mi'a. You know, like today we look at certain things and we try to judge people. They were 110% Muslims, zahiran. They were 110% Muslims apparently. وَحَتَّى صَلَاةُ الْفَجْرِ Fajr prayer, they prayed it behind whom? Behind the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imagine that level of hypocrisy. Not level of iman, level of hypocrisy. Because if they weren't there for Fajr, they would know either you should be traveling or you are severely sick. Other than that, only a hypocrite would miss Fajr behind whom? Behind the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Weigh that in comparison to us today. Oh, what's the big deen in coming in Fajr? Why is it important to come to the masjid? I can just pray my jama'ah in my room. The angels are there, or pray with my whatever it may be. I don't need to walk 2 blocks to come to the masjid. This is qillatul iman, ya ikhwa. This is weakness of iman. That's you find in a hadith. Whoever comes to 2 dark prayers, Salatul Fajr and Salatul Isha, fashhad lahu iman. Testify that person has what? Iman. Testify that person, there's something iman, that the person is coming for Salatul Subh, coming for Fajr, coming for Isha. And if a person knew what the reward was, you would do what? You'd come crawling like a baby. You'd come crawling. And that's why the athqal salatayn, athqal salat, the most heavy of prayers, upon whom? Upon the munafiqun is what? Is Fajr wal Salatul Isha. And look how many times in our life, or in a day, on a weekly basis, does it just go by us? We don't begin to think, the companions, they miss Fajr, the Jama'ah, they will hide in the crooks and the crevices, they will hide. Nobody will spot them, they miss Fajr. Imagine that. So we don't sometimes think what nifaq is, what hypocrisy is. And it's something very, very dangerous. As for the extreme level of what we find that people who begin to pretend to be Muslims, Orientalists, you find some strange things. There's some individuals who went and performed Hajj, people like Richard Burton, his 2-volume books talking about Hajj and his journey, or we even call himself Abdullah and everything, all to find out what Muslims are like. Done everything, performed Hajj, traveling with Muslims, doing Hajj. But obviously his intent was something else, to write against Muslims, to talk about Muslims, to find mistakes about Muslims. But look at their level of how they remain committed in what they want to do. And unfortunately, we find there will be, obviously they're no longer Muslims, who have this deceiving nature of people who display Islam, but they have the intent to destroy Islam from within. That's why many non-Muslims, they know it's not possible to destroy Islam externally. You have to destroy Islam from where? From within. You have to create deviancy from within the Muslim Ummah to destroy them. If you study that in great detail, you'll find what I'm referring to. You can't destroy Muslims in totality today, alhamdulillah. But you can begin to destroy them by what? Instilling deviancy inside their belief. That's when you read about the seerah of many of these individuals, these corrupt individuals and these munafiqun. Look at the history behind them. Look at the people who pull the strings behind them. Or the organizations, or whatever movement it may be, or whatever foundation, whatever it may be. Go and look carefully what you find of the funding, of giving the aid, of turning a blind eye, or helping to set them all up. You will find it will be, in general, disbelievers who have aided these individuals to come within Islam and try to destroy the teaching of Islam. إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Quran describes that munafiqeen, they are fasiqun. They are rebellious individuals, and thus we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that those pure hypocrites are more evil, more wicked min al-kafirin. Because a kafir just rejects and just gets on with his own thing and will have his own punishment. But the munafiq is the one who's trying to display something, and that is more wicked and more evil than even a disbeliever. That's what Quran mentions. Indeed, the munafiqeen will be fi darkil asfali min an-nar, will be in the lowest depths of the hellfire. That's what the munafiqun will be in, lowest depths of the hellfire. Because why? Even below the disbelievers, because they have the intent to try to destroy Islam. إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَهُوَ خَادِعُهُم. They try to trick and deceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, if you study in great detail, I think Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya mentioned as well, the first 2-3 ayat talk about the believers, the next 1 or 2 ayat talk about the disbelievers, and guess what? The following page or so, 12 ayat, which Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya wrote a whole risala, Sifat al-Munafiqeen, talk about the characteristics of the hypocrites, talks about whom? The hypocrites. Strange, isn't it? The beginning of the Quran is focusing upon hypocrites. As we mentioned on many, many occasions, Manhajul Quran, the whole methodology of the Quran is to instill within the believers that stay away from those practices of those people that came in before and what they used to do inside their lives to save and to rescue yourselves. So that's when the Quran, alhamdulillah, begins to talk about Ahlul Kitab, talks about Al-Yahud, talks about Al-Nasara, talks about Quraysh, talks about the Bedouin Arabs, talks about people who disbelieve. Some of us, what do we begin to think? Oh, look at these foolish individuals, or we don't do that. You've misunderstood the Quran. The Quran is trying to highlight, guess what? You're going to do exactly the same thing. But we are unfortunately what? None the wiser. That's the ibrah the person should take from the Quran. That's what ulama of usul al-tafsir mentioned. Al-ibrah bi-umum al-lafzi la bi-khusus al-sabr. The lesson of the Quran is to be taken from the generality of the words and not from the specifics of revelation. So in the Quran, you khatib Ahlul Kitab, talks about Ahlul Kitab, talks about this, talks about that. It's actually speaking to who? It's speaking to me, speaking to you, speaking to this Muslim Ummah. That's what the Quran is. That's the ibrah. That's the lesson we should take. It's from the generality of the words and not from the specifics of revelation. Yes, there are specific ayat that concern certain individuals, but the real meaning is we are supposed to be wary, we're supposed to be worried, we're supposed to be not making that same mistake. Even the Quran mentions, the most of this Quran, يَقُصُّ عَلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل. Most of this Quran narrates or talks about whom? Bani Israel. Most of this Quran is talking about them, Ya Bani Israel, thrown so many times throughout Surah Al-Baqarah. So many things inside Surah Al-Imran, حتى Surah Al-Nisa, Al-Ma'ida, Al-An'am, Al-A'raf, حتى آخر Al-Quran, Al-Ahad. Surah Al-Ikhlas is all talking about Raddun ala al-Nasara or al-Yahud. It's all talking about them. The whole of the Quran is talking about Bani Israel. For what intent? That we begin to become the wiser individuals. So inshallah, hopefully we'll begin to anwa' al-nifaq, begin to talk about the types of nifaq, hypocrisy, that exist, those which are the major types which ulama mentioned, which take the person out of the fold of Islam, and then secondly nifaq al-amali, nifaq of any actions, the minor action that begin to have elements of hypocrisy inside individual. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us away from any element of major kufr, minor kufr, major nifaq or minor nifaq inside our lives and make us meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with pure and sound heart. وَقُولُوا قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِجَمِيعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا إِنَّهُ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Take one or two questions that you might put to inshallah. Some corrections or comments inshallah. Go ahead, Akhi.
You mentioned in the beginning about Tawheed and Aqidah as well. Aqidah comes in the Quran as well, like indirectly.
Indirectly, that's right, yeah.
So
linguistically.
Yeah. So what would be appropriate, like if we, I don't know, teach or learning Aqidah or Tawheed, which word would be more appropriate to this subject?
Yeah, like I said, all of these words, ask a question that the word we mentioned, Tawheed, the word Aqidah doesn't come inside the Quran. All these words are synonymous. For example, you find a Sunnah. A Sunnah at times you find means what? Aqidah. So that's why you find books of Kitab al-Sunnah. Kitab al-Sunnah is talking about what? It's not talking about Sunnah al-Fi'liya or al-Qawliya, the statements and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. It's talking about what? Kitab al-Sunnah, Imam Ahmad, that you find Imam al-Barbahari, that we find is talking about what? Aqidah. So likewise, you find that word becomes dominant. Sometimes al-usul becomes dominant. Usul al-Deen becomes talking about Aqidah. Sometimes al-Tawheed. So it makes no difference to us. As long as the principle is the same, a person, the mu'allif, the author may choose a certain word and say this is the Aqidah of Ahlul Sunnah, or it could say this is the teaching of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah that we find. And even if you look at the meaning of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what begins to happen? Some people who deviate it begin to take that title. Don't they? They say we're Ahlul Sunnah. But they're actually people of innovation or people of brainwash or whatever it may be, but they've hijacked their name. So what do we do now? So we look at the principle. What concerns us is the principle. That's what you find when Muhammad al-Wahhab, he wrote his famous book, Kitab al-Tawheed. And you know how people don't like the name Wahhab, Abdul Wahhab, even though Wahhab is one name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one the teachers that you find in Mashaykh, every time you daris, you sabbu Abdul Wahhab. He's cursing, he's like this, kata, he's like this, every time. Doesn't know anything about it. Just like today, Wahhabi, that's it. Finish, isn't it? So one of the students, and he was intelligent. The Sheikh used to read a lot. He used to read and study. So the student got a book, and he left the book on the table of the Sheikh. Ilman, knowing the Sheikh's going to pick up the book and start reading the book. Sheikh picked up the book, took it out, no cover on the book, this empty book, took it out, started reading it, came back the next day. The student said to him, Sheikh, I left my book on the table. Best book on Tawheed I ever read in my life. Nothing but Qala Allah wa Qala Rasul. That's what people don't understand. If you go and look at Kitab al-Tawheed, it's nothing but Allah said this, the Prophet said this, companion said this. That is all that's inside the book. Sheikh, this is the best book I've read in my life. Man al-Mu'allif, who's the author? Because there's no khilaf, there's no cover there. I don't know who the author. You need to know who the Mu'allif is. Student goes to him, Sheikh, that is the book Kitab al-Tawheed of Sheikh Abdul Wahhab. Not possible. Took out the cover, gave him the cover to the book. After that, late Sheikh always used to do what? Praise the Sheikh. Because that's what we find so much clout. People like to make up things. And that's what the tasting, and he's always tasting the pudding. You'll find the answer there. Whenever I've done in my life, whenever people say, don't read this, don't look at this, you know what? Guess what? It's the opposite. I remember mentioning I talk, don't take that as golden, it's not for you guys, but that's for us. You go there and you find the opposite. Unless a person comes with clear evidence, then that's something else. Other than that, you find there's an element of al-hasad, there's an element bayn al-ulama, hatta you find there's jealousy. People say, don't read these books, don't listen to him, don't do this. No, in the hasad that you find, amongst famous ulama, previously as well, that you find, at times wrote harsh words against one another. So a person should look at the text, look at what exists there, and if anything which is inaccurate, that will be highlighted in it appropriately, inshallah. So the name, as we mentioned, is not any very important, but more inshallah. Take one of the questions that I need to leave, inshallah. No other questions? Go ahead, Akhi.
So, the three Tawheeds, right? The categories, the Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, and the Hakimiyyah, for example. Would we say it's part of the core fundamental beliefs, or could we say it's by the way?
No, like we said, if people begin to say Al-Hakimiyyah, is it a fourth category? Sheikh Muhammad Salih Taymi mentions that bid'ah is an innovation to make a fourth category in this manner. Other ulama have discussed it in great detail. But what we can safely conclude, if you just ignore that for now, the concept of ruling and governing, what many people fail to understand, this is what we begin to debate about this. Fair enough, it could be a deviation, but the main crux of the issue is what? Does it not become a part of ibadah? If you go and read books on Aqidah, what do you find inside there? that rule and judgment should be by the law and the governing sovereign and power and authority of the laws of Allah. See, that's what we fail to understand. As we begin to debate about this, we begin to lose the main focus, that law and legislation is by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is all part and parcel of ubudiyyah, all part of worship. Worship is not just the physical worship that we offer. Worship is also that everything around us is exposed to what? To worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via His authority, His word becoming supreme. So we need to obviously highlight that's a deviancy. People begin to highlight that as a fourth category or whatever it may be, and highlight that, you don't need to chant about that. And likewise, we don't need to chant about this is deviancy and this is corruption. Go back to the essence and try to instill within the people that is part of ubudiyyah, part of uluhiyyah, part of worship, that it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to follow His teachings and to apply and make those rulings to be upon the earth is what makes people of Tawheed. That comes to the upper level of al-Tawheed, is that you find that it is what? It is now implemented. We're still at the stage of reading and etc. and studying, but there comes a stage whereby it becomes action, implementation. Is the journey going to develop, inshallah. Our lives will stop there. We'll have questions to ask me, inshallah.